Hello and welcome to this, the fourth in a series of webinars brought to you by the European Institute of Health and Sustainable Development, the EIHSD, whose mission it is to find Europe-wide solutions to healthcare problems. And we've had quite a few issues with healthcare of late, as you can imagine. The EIHSD is supported by the Open Society Foundation. My name is Joe Lynham and I present the Newsroom programme on the BBC World Service, and for quite a few years before that, I was a business correspondent presenter. So I hope you're all keeping well and that your family hasn't had this awful virus, which has taken so many thousands of lives in Europe and so many around the world as well. And I hope you get your vaccine into your arms as soon as possible. If COVID-19 has done one positive thing, it has to put healthcare at the centre of our lives, at the centre of our attention. Today's fourth webinar is entitled European Health Policy at the Start of the Conference on the Future of Europe. It will build on the Institute's previous developed findings, and this seminar's focus will be on the assessment of factors that in the midterm perspective are likely to affect European and global healthcare policy and healthcare workforces. This webinar is an integral part of a three-year project called Working Together to Address Health Workforce Mobility in Europe. Up to 12 webinars to address the unequal distribution of healthcare workforces in Europe, to participate in designing policies to support regions that have difficulties in attracting healthcare workers or are losing healthcare workers to wealthier countries. The conclusions of today's seminar are going to be developed and will be shared with you in 2 weeks' time. It'll all be put on the website EIHSD.eu. In a moment, we will hear from Ana Carla Pereira, who is an expert within the cabinet of Nicolas Schmit, the Commissioner for Jobs and Social Rights within the European Union, a very important portfolio. We'll also hear from Ilona Kickbush, a well-known health reformer and advisor to the Global Health Summit, which will be in Rome this year. Then in the second session, we'll bring in Jonathan Cohen from New York live, and he works for the the Open Society Foundation, and will speak about a framework for approaching vaccines and ensuring access to health as a public good. Finally, we'll hear from the boss of the EIHSD and the former EU Health Commissioner, Vytenis Andriukaitis. After Vytenis, we'll have our Q&A, and that's your chance to get in your questions and to probe this very talented and very powerful panel. So you know how to post questions on Teams. You've already logged in. You've posted questions, I'm sure, 1,000 times before over the last year and a quarter. So please get your questions in now, and we will put them to the panel. Say who you are and who you'd like to address it to. All the biographies and the CVs and the resumes will be on the website, EIHSD.eu/news. The hashtag is sustainable development. Hashtag sustainable development. Everything's on the record, so please be nice. Be nice. But before all of that, I'd like to play a video from April for you, refreshing your memory about some of the issues that we discussed in the third webinar in this series by EIHSD, notably the pull and push factors of healthcare workforce mobility, taking into account the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. Please start thinking of your questions now. You can start posting them now if you want. And while you're doing that, Audrius, if you could roll the tape there and we could refresh all our memories.
Just a few days ago, Eurobarometer published a preliminary report on preferences of Europeans. Health always was a top priority for families. Today, health is a top priority of the European Union. The conclusions reached so far are as follows. First, international mobility of medical personnel is growing. Wealthy OECD economies are mainly playing a role of destination, and developing economies, plus economies of Central and Eastern Europe, a role of source countries. Second, formal training of medical personnel is a main factor shaping supply of professionals globally and, in long run, nationally. Current surge of recruitment of foreign-trained doctors by the developed world is, at least partially, based on a reduction of medical students numbers in countries affected by neoliberal thinking and cost containment policies of the 80s and 90s and austerity policies that damaged healthcare systems after the recession of 2007-2009. Relatively low income of medical professionals in developing countries and the European East are the main push factor of international mobility. Some experts see a convergence between the old and new states of the EU as a factor reducing opportunities to increase income by international mobility. The future will tell us how realistic this prediction is. European Union law prioritizes free movement of labor against public health objective-based regulation of the labor market. This reality favors positive incentives of retention implemented by the member states and at the same time limits the toolkits of restrictive national labor policies within the EU. Correlation between total employment and in the health sector and excess mortality appear to be strongest. A role of auxiliary, technical, managerial, and administrative personnel, as well as a role of informal carriers, deserves to be better documented and studied.
And one of suggestion and proposal from the worker side was to enlarge fundamental declaration by special convention on occupation health and safety. It means that occupation health and safety to work decent conditions and safe conditions in healthy conditions is fundamental right and principle. So every half an hour, one healthcare workers die from COVID-19. You can imagine that during our webinar, which will take 2 hours, 4 healthcare workers will die from COVID-19. So in February, International Labour Organization and World Health Organization prepared and distributed interim guidance, COVID-19, occupational health and safety for health workers. And on migration, we also now paying as the most suffered part of employees and workers are workers migrants.
So as the populations age and as the healthcare needs become more complex, most health providers and hospitals are really facing that global shortage of workers that we're talking about. And of course, it's coming at the worst time possible. So, and by 2030, we expect providers to suffer from a projected shortage of 14 million workers worldwide, which is huge. So if you look at the new vision of healthcare, as we see it from working with, thousands of customers already all over the world, it's that gaining that holistic view of the patient, increasing the number of patients served while maintaining the high quality and high touch interactions, visualizing health trends and outcomes that will also add to the efficiency and to the speed of care and to the knowledge, honestly, of both care teams and patients, serving the community better, really reaching everybody in the community and not centralizing around certain clinics, but really reaching everybody. We saw that very clearly around COVID. Having a platform that can scale with you, so really have the ability to scale up and down, with pandemic waves or with any wave that the sinus waves of healthcare treatment, and just in general improve that patient experience and the care team experience. Really have that quick access to data and to health information.
There are 8 countries where the people during the last decade decreased almost 2 million, while in whole EU 27, we have an increase about 8 million, mainly coming from outside the European Union, but also some people from these 8 countries at the periphery. But if we look on the 2 regions, then we see that in the group countries B, the immigration countries, the average number of doctors per person or per inhabitant is even in the median a little bit higher than in the immigration countries. But the opposite is for nurses. In nurses, we have substantially less nurses in the immigration countries, and the situation is even more worse concerning other health professionals. Now, the question was now how to link this information to diseases. And I have summarized this in an aggregate way, linking information from the project of HEDIC, health expenditures by disease, with the skill structures and national accounts information. Long-term immigration always means a loss of income for the immigration countries, but a positive income situation for the immigration countries, and negative for the immigration countries. And I found it in the last webinar very interesting from Dr. Auletsky, where he emphasized the short-term emigration, because only the short-term emigration might lead really to a win-win situation for both country groups. And this can be now in a model with quantified, one can show the total income effects and also the special effects for the country groups.
Actually, the number of students enrolled in tertiary education outside their country of citizenship has sharply increased over the recent decades, reflecting the expansion of tertiary education systems worldwide and globalization from roughly 1.3 million worldwide in 1990 to 5.6 million in 2018. And the usual destinations are, of course, developed, mostly English-speaking countries as UK and USA, and also non-English as Germany and France. We rank countries according to the share of tertiary students in the field of health and welfare studies. Countries like Bulgaria, Slovakia, Romania appear in the first ranks, and actually many others are also considerably above EU27 average, among usual suspects as Ireland. If we are aiming to understand the phenomenon, we need to find out what is pushing or pulling these students to choose their destinations for medical students. Traditionally, attractiveness of a country or educational institution was largely determined by the prospects of improvement of employability, getting closer to labor markets. Also, for some countries, political stability, European values, and what eases transition are cultural and religious similarities. However, recently, financial factors, Bologna process that results in recognition of medical diplomas across EU and EFTA countries, and globalization, also active recruitment, are of increasing importance.
Thanks to everybody who took part in the seminar in April, which was Marcus Schneider, Sergejos Glogaskas, Ruti Kaidar, Beirut Timieni, for their help last time. Now, without any further ado, let's discuss our first big issue now relating to workforces in healthcare, and hear from Ana Carla Pereira, who is the cabinet expert within the cabinet of Nicola Schmidt, the Commissioner for Jobs and Social Rights. Ana Carla can talk about the Porto Social Summit from last month and its impact on the European Pillar of Social Rights at EU and national level. Ana Carla, maybe you could unmute yourself and don't make the same mistake that I made. The floor is yours.
Hello, good afternoon. I think I'm unmuted. Right.
All good.
So thank you very much for inviting me to this webinar. I understand it's a series of webinars that have been taking place around the challenges that healthcare and the workforce in healthcare face. I'm going to talk about the Porto Social Summit, which is a bit broader in its scope, so not specifically on health, but hopefully it gives a good frame for understanding how your ongoing discussions fits in other types of frameworks that we are currently developing in the EU. So I would like to refer, let's say, to 4 big outcomes or deliverables from the Porto Social Summit that has happened in Porto, in Portugal, on the 7th and 8th of May. And I think that the first important deliverable or achievement was a political message that we are facing a paradigm shift in the way we look at social policies, the way we look at social investment. And of course, there we also should say that to us, investing in health is considered social investment. But we think that the Porto Social Summit has indeed brought an element of change in the political discourse. And if we look back at what has happened 15 years ago with the financial crisis and how much the accent was then on austerity and trying to contain public budgets and being certainly driven by fiscal sustainability considerations, this time around we are in a different political response to this shock that we all face. And for us, this is an extremely important message that the Porto Social Summit in many ways confirmed for the European level. We have had in presence 27 European leaders so prime ministers of member states. We had the European Parliament. We had the President of the European Commission, Madam von der Leyen. We had social partners, civil society, and there was really a confluence of thought that this time around recovery needs to be inclusive. It needs to look at those that could be left out if we embark in an economic recovery after the pandemic. And so this is to us, I would say, an important achievement, because it helps us move forward. We are no longer discussing anymore should we, but we are mainly discussing how should we deliver. And obviously in this respect, the Porto Social Summit was also a continuation of what has happened in previous years, because of course the European Pillar of Social Rights that you have mentioned, Joe, is a policy, a political framework where we set out a number of elements which we believe Europe should strive to. So 20 principles that reflect social rights, and these were proclaimed in 2017 in the Social Summit that has happened in Gothenburg. Now, Gothenburg happened 20 years after the first Social Summit has happened in 1997 in Luxembourg. Now, Porto happens 4 years after Gothenburg. So I think this is also a symptom that there is a different dynamic in looking into these issues. Now, the difference between Porto and Gothenburg is that we are no longer looking at the principles, but looking more at how to implement them. And so the how becomes really a key element in the discussions that we are taking forward. The second deliverable, I would say, that follows this paradigm shift is related to governance. It is the first time that at European level, social partners reach an agreement with EU institutions on what are the most important elements or the highest political messages to convey in this field. together. So there were the European institutions, there was the social partners and civil society. And this means that we are pursuing the notion of the European social market economy, where the intervention of social partners and civil society are at the cornerstone of the governance at different levels. And of course, we as an institution, the European Commission, has always pushed forward the role of social partners in the workplace, in the debates at national level. We have also had discussions with regular discussions with social partners at European level, but it is the first time that we reach a political commitment from all levels, including social partners in this area. And I think this is very much it's something to celebrate. And I think that the deliverable is that next social summit, hopefully not in 20 years, but soon, we will not go back, that this is a governance model to stay, because we need all actors to be engaged in this conversation. The third element relates to the realization that we need to have some sort of moonshot goalposts to strive to. And the EU has established in 2019 or 2020 the targets related to the Green Deal and also to the digital transition. And with the Porto Social Summit, we have also agreed on a number of headline targets in the area of employment and social affairs. And we have identified three main headline targets. The first one being to strive to increase the employment rate, because we know that higher employment levels are a vehicle for a higher social inclusion and also higher levels of economic well-being for families and people. And therefore, we are certain that there is not only an economic component in employment policies, but also a social dimension that is a sort of condition sine qua non for higher levels of social cohesion. So we have established as a headline target for employment 78% by 2030. And this, of course, requires a strong effort in increasing the female employment rate, since today the gender employment gap is extremely wide. So we will not be able to reach the 78% without at least halving the gender employment gap that today exists in the EU. The second target we have identified is to increase efforts and investment on training and skills, and particularly among the adult population. I think we can, although things are not perfect, but I think we can acknowledge that in the last 2-3 decades, a lot has happened in the EU to increase educational levels at the initial education level, so high school and university. But we do see the need to focus more strongly on adult training, because obviously the green and digital transitions that we are striving for will require new skills, will require new ways of looking at work, and this obviously implies more investment in training. And therefore, in our headline target for training, we have called on reaching 60% of the adult population having access to training every year, which is a very, very ambitious number, but still we think realistic. And the third headline target relates to poverty and combating inequalities. I think through the pandemic, we saw how many families had difficulty not only in having access to healthcare, but simply just having access to a meal. And we saw how in many countries the lines for what would be probably in last century the food stamps, but today sort of just food banks, how these lines grew in countries like France or Spain, which we would thought was almost immune to this kind of problem. So combating poverty, combating inequalities is certainly one of the aspects we are looking at, and our headline target is to lift out of poverty or social exclusion at least 15 million Europeans. Now, the final deliverable for the Commission, I now call a little bit here on a selfish moment, is an endorsement of the Commission Action Plan to implement the European Pillar of Social Rights. In this action plan, we have made a proposal on these headline targets, which have been endorsed by the Council and endorsed by our political leaders. But also, we had put in this action plan a number of concrete actions to turn the principles of the European Pillar of Social Rights in things that are more tangible. And our action plan has a span, is looking at 2030 as an horizon, but we have introduced a review clause by the end of this College of Commissioners, so that their successors would have opportunity to bring new ideas into place. And there is a very long, very extended list of actions, but because we are talking about health in this context, I would like to mention three, which I think are particularly relevant for those listening to us. The first one is certainly a new strategic framework on occupational safety and health that the Commission is actually going to present just next Monday or Tuesday. And this new strategic framework brings about new elements of how we should look at occupational health and safety. So obviously it's mainly about the workplace, but there are, of course, elements that then have an impact in the healthcare system, because prevention in the workplace means less efforts in the healthcare system. But there's also an impact to the health care workers as such, because we know that the healthcare workers, nurses, doctors are exposed to many substances that can also be dangerous for their own health. So I think this is an important piece that we have announced in the action plan for the European Pillar of Social Rights, and that will be presented next week. And I'm certain that you will be interested in looking at that. The second action I want to refer to is an initiative on long-term care. And we all know that long-term care and social services are not necessarily healthcare services. It's not exactly the same, but there are many, many points of convergence and of bridge. And because we know our societies are aging at a fast pace, it is important to look at how we are going to cope as a society to this new demand or an increased demand for care services. And the dimensions to look at are, of course, multifold. And I would just like to here refer to two. First, certainly a very strong gender dimension, because like in healthcare, also the social care sector is profoundly dominated by women and female work. But the conditions, and this is the second area I wanted to refer, the conditions in which the work is performed is in many, many circumstances very precarious. Unlike the healthcare sector, if you allow me this comparison, There are no regulated professions in the care sector. You have very often people that have been qualified as nurses but have moved to another country. They are not, their diploma is no longer recognized, and they end up performing care work, most often with a much lower salaries than they would have if they were performing their tasks as healthcare professionals. We have issues of related to care in the domestic setting, and knowing that domestic workers performing care services are often not at all under the radar of any type of policy. And we have, of course, the skills dimension issue, which is extremely relevant in times of shortages. And I think this is very, very common, both to the care sector and the healthcare sector. And obviously, the integration of these two aspects, healthcare and social care, into an integrated approach is for us an essential element of the discussion. So next year, the Commission will present an initiative on long-term care, and we hope this will trigger a debate with the member states around these areas that have been a little bit forgotten, if you allow me. And then the third point is to say that we will initiate work with high-level experts on the future of welfare state. And I think the pandemic just showed us how important a strong welfare state is to cushion important shocks. We all saw how crucial it was to have very strong healthcare systems to be able to face the pandemic, and how fragile some countries became because they had not invested sufficiently or not efficiently enough in their healthcare system in the last decades. So there is now a recognition, I think, that the welfare state is here and fundamental, and it is necessary to reflect on how we can shape them to be more fit for purpose in the future. So these are some, I just mentioned 3 actions. As I mentioned, there are much more in the action plan. And what has happened in the Porto Social Summit is that there was a recognition or an acknowledgement that all these actions merit its place and its conversation. So for us, this was a very successful event, not only in changing the narrative or allowing to change the narrative, but giving us a mandate of and for the future work and the activities ahead. So I'll leave it at that, and I'm happy to take questions later on. Thank you so much.
Obrigado, Ana Carla.
Obrigado.
Yes, do stay with us. I'll be putting a question to you after we hear from our next speaker, Ilona Kickbush. She's with the Global Health Summit and knows a fair amount about this subject. And she's been watching the conference on the future of Europe. And I know Vitanis has some strong thoughts on that conference as well. It started last month and has been hearing evidence from people from all over Europe about what they want from the European Union in future. So if you could play that tape, Aldrius, we'll hear from Ilona, and then I'll put a question to Ana Carla, who is live.
Dear colleagues, I would like to argue why it is essential to understand the development of a European health union in its global dimension, and why it is important to understand it beyond dealing with pandemics. Even though the pandemic has brought to center stage that health must be central to the European Union and has led to proposals to amend the Lisbon Treaty to give the Commission greater responsibility for health. This was long overdue. Still, we must ensure that the understanding of health is not approached too narrowly, as this has consequences both within the EU and for its global role. We must understand that we now have a different understanding of health, and I would like to underline 6 dimensions of this. First, After the adoption of the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, we have put health and well-being in the center of the health debate. This relates to many Commission policies and directorates, first and foremost, of course, Social Europe. And the many dimensions raised by the Finnish presidency on the economics of well-being are central to this. This, of course, links also to many other issues on sustainability, where the EU must ensure a high level of well-being for its citizens and provide approaches to other parts of the world as well. This means having different measures of success of a society. This links into my second point, the political point, much larger political issues. A dominant concern today is geopolitical system competition. A range of summits, most recently the G7, have been concerned about the deliverables of democracies for their people. Health and well-being are center stage for European citizens, as many surveys tell us. And the EU must deliver to ensure support to the European project. This is an important, larger political dimension of the EU's work. It links also to my third point, equity. The SDGs require us to leave no one behind. The EU has shown great responsibility as a development actor. It is actually the largest donor. And it has shown great responsibility in the COVID pandemic. It has supported WHO, it has provided funding for new initiatives in global health like ACT-A, and especially COVAX, the Alliance for Equitable Distribution of Vaccines. But, and we must say this clearly, it is not doing enough. The Rome Global Health Summit did not provide the breakthrough. If we continue with vaccine apartheid, as the DG of the WHO has called it, Europe will also suffer geopolitically in terms of partnerships with countries in the global south. Fourth, health in all policies. This applies to other policy areas where Europe has, as a major trading bloc, sets conditions for other parts of the world. This is sometimes called the Brussels effect. We must look more carefully at trade policy, at food safety, at chemical safety, at digital health and their health dimensions. The EU must implement its obligations that call for the protection of a high level of public health in all EU policies and regulations. And we are now, with the pandemic, starting to understand that this also includes EU external policies and security law and policies. We must act that European values and economic imperatives come together better with a view to a sustainable future. My fifth point is that health increasingly must be understood beyond just human health. Many declarations on global health have recently highlighted the importance of a concept we call One Health, which brings four dimensions together: human health, animal health, agricultural health and food security, and environmental health. The World Health Organization has been a leader to bring these areas of action together, and Germany and France, for example, have supported major work in this area. The EU must become a leader in One Health. The pandemic has shown us the relevance of viruses moving from animals to people. One Health is key to pandemic preparedness and pushes for a broader understanding of public health and the European actions we need in this area. This must also be reflected in the potential pandemic treaty that the EU has proposed. It will require a new way of working with the Commission and with partners around the world. The EU's One Health programme is a first step in this direction. And finally, my sixth point, the EU must become a leader in planetary health. The European Green Deal to become climate neutral by 2050 is a first step in this direction. It accepts that human health and the health of the planet are inextricably linked, and that they in turn are linked to a new economy that must support the reduction of regional and social inequalities. The EU must lead the world on responsible and innovative climate action and reach its goal to be the first climate neutral continent. And it must shift the EU economy on a new development path and support developing countries in moving in the same direction. So in summary, a European health union cannot separate social issues from health and environmental and climate issues. It is always the poorest and most vulnerable that suffer most. These issues belong inextricably together in the 21st century. The EU must restructure its work internally and externally to reflect this and to champion to leave no one behind. It must lead as a responsible global actor, bringing together public health, global health, One Health, and planetary health. Its actions at home, in Europe, and abroad can no longer be separated in a global world. So together, if we do that together, it will benefit both the European population and the world at large. Thank you.
Danke schön, Ilona, for your contribution there. And I'm sorry you couldn't make it with us today live, but you made some very interesting points there, 6 very interesting points, which I'm sure we will be discussing. I'll certainly be raising the so-called Brussels effect with Jonathan Cohen when we come to him a little bit. Before we come to Jonathan and to Vitanis, I want to ask Ana Carla Pereira from the European Commission a question which relates to the social summit in Porto. Ana Carla, the EU has traditionally left health up to the member states, that it is a national issue. A lot of people are starting to talk about making it an EU-wide issue. I just wonder, how realistic is that? There's already been talk about amending or changing the Lisbon Treaty. We also know that changing treaties is a big deal politically. So how realistic is it to make a European health union, for example? Ana Carla.
Well, that's a very, very, very tricky question, Joe. I'm not certain I can give you a straight answer. But let me just say this. I think it is after the pandemic and seeing, I mean, there is a profound realization that we are so interconnected, right? I mean, it is something that we already knew before, and the financial crisis now related to other issues showed us that we were already interconnected, but I think we never really came to this realization as with this pandemic. And it is in times of crisis that things happen. So I don't know if it is realistic or not. What I know, it is more realistic today than 20 years ago. That's, I think, an important element. The second element is, of course, that the fact that the European Union acted as one showed a clear understanding by heads of state that they needed a much more concerted action than before. And I think it is, of course, for the national leaders, the member states, then to go that road if we are to have a health union, right? So if our national leaders, the prime ministers, the heads of state come to the realization that also in health we are better together than separately, then it becomes realistic. And I think the signs of what has happened in response to the pandemic are positive in this respect. Now, I think we have the the exercise on the Conference of Future of Europe, which is a discussion about what future we want. And some stakeholders involved in that discussion claim that we should look at the treaty and look at the new forms of rebalancing powers. I think we need to follow that discussion to really be able to answer your question, Joe, whether this is realistic or not. But I think the fact that we are discussing about it just shows that it is more realistic today than a few decades ago. This is clear for me.
Obrigado. Don't worry, I will put some tricky questions to Vytenis, who of course served as European Health Commissioner. I'm sure he'll have some strong views on that. Let's move into our second session now, and we have two great speakers, one you know all very well, and one who will give us a very important global perspective on health policy. So let's go now to our third speaker, Jonathan Cohen from the Open Society Foundation, based in New York City in the United States. Jonathan will be speaking about vaccine justice, a framework for approaching vaccines and ensuring access to health as a public good. Jonathan, if you can unmute, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Joe. And thank you also to Vytenis Andriukaitis and the European Institute for Health and Sustainable Development for this kind invitation, and thanks to my fellow panelists. It has been an honor for the Open Society Foundations to partner with the EIHSD to advance a common European approach to the issue that Anna Carla addressed, the migration and mobility of health workers. And of course, as Ilona Kickbush underscored, like every issue in public health, this is not only a European issue, it is a global issue that requires global cooperation. In my remarks today, I want to address another issue that also requires both regional and global cooperation, and that is access to COVID-19 vaccines. Like the migration and mobility of health workers, this is an issue that is plagued today by inequity, fragmentation, and neoliberal frameworks, rather than embodying ideas of solidarity, human rights, and public good. It is an issue that requires a common European foreign policy in addition to intra-regional integration. And on the eve of the Conference on the Future of Europe and in the wake of the summit of G7 nations, I can hardly think of an issue more prominent on the global public health agenda. From the moment the COVID-19 pandemic began, it was clear that the development of COVID-19 vaccines would be a major site of struggle for equity and solidarity in public health. We could see this in the early hoarding and export restrictions on personal protective equipment and testing, the bulk pre-purchasing of yet-to-be-approved vaccines by wealthy countries, and the reliance on traditional aid models to distribute eventual vaccines to low and middle-income countries. All of these issues will be very familiar to a European audience, for it is Europe, along with the United States and China, that has the privilege of being one of the few places in the world with the power to develop and manufacture vaccines or not. And with that power comes a choice and a responsibility, either to allow vaccines to become an instrument of profit, diplomacy, and inequity, or to truly commit to vaccinating the world as a matter of public health and solidarity. Joe, I'm just going to stop for a moment because I think somebody is not muted and I'm hearing feedback. Thank you. Throughout 2020, activists and experts were quick to point out that vaccine hoarding, pre-purchasing, and monopolies on production confirmed the failures of a broken pharmaceutical model. This model lacks incentives for a profit-driven industry to develop vaccines more quickly. It consolidates control of vaccine manufacturing within a few wealthy countries who can turn off the tap as soon as they have used up the vaccines they need. And it charges high prices for vaccines, even for low and middle income countries that are going deeper into debt precisely because of the pandemic. So months before a safe and effective vaccine had even been approved, these concerns coalesced around a global campaign for the people's vaccine. This campaign represents a growing movement of health and humanitarian organizations, past and present world leaders, health experts, faith leaders, and economists, urging that vaccines are produced rapidly at scale and made available for all people in all countries free of charge. And indeed, much of the high-level support for this campaign has come from Europe, including multiple former European heads of state. Now that safe and effective vaccines have been developed, the situation has become even worse than imagined. A small handful of countries have administered the great majority of all COVID-19 vaccines, and many countries have not yet received a single dose. At this rate, more than 85 poor countries will not have widespread access to coronavirus vaccines before 2023. This is obviously not nearly fast enough to keep up with the spread of variant strains of the coronavirus. Inequity in global vaccine access is so stark and threatens to deepen existing inequalities so dramatically that, as Ilona Kickbush pointed out, it has been labeled a catastrophic moral failure by the Director General of the World Health Organization, a form of apartheid, and indeed the surest way to prolong this pandemic. Now, long before COVID-19, my colleagues and I at the Open Society Foundations had been debating whether the international human rights framework, which has long provided the main normative compass for our work, and which indeed has been domesticated in Europe through the European Convention on Human Rights and multiple national constitutions, is fit to take on an injustice at this moral scale. For me, this is a question of both theory and practice. Human rights are theoretically rooted in the inherent dignity and freedom of all people, and they condition state and private sector action on respect for these norms. Theories of justice amplify human rights by being also rooted in the historical oppression, dispossession, and exploitation of entire peoples that is built into and effected through political and legal structures. In practice, human rights action is focused on the identification and analysis of specific violations and infringements for which redress is then sought. Practices of justice can amplify this by directing themselves to radical, transformative change of the structures and systems of economic and social life. Such appeals to radical and transformative change have indeed become commonplace since the pandemic, including in the field of vaccines. So my colleagues at Open Society and I asked ourselves, what might a theory and practice of vaccine justice look like? And how might a concept of vaccine justice shape European policy and practice at both the regional and the global level? And I just want to quickly outline what I think that concept of vaccine justice looks like for you as we continue to debate it and refine it. The concept of vaccine justice rests on two stark realities. First, that COVID-19 is a global problem that requires a global solution, a solution grounded in cooperation and transnational governance. Second, that this global problem does not impact everybody equally. On the contrary, it reflects and magnifies inequities in our global system, and any solution must account for and rectify those inequities in order to be effective. Unfortunately, as currently designed, the massive global vaccine effort now alleged to be underway simply will not succeed because it does not take into account systems of inequity. The impact of the disease, as well as the information and resources to confront it, are too inequitable across race, gender, caste, socioeconomic status, and income level of affected countries and people for vaccine efforts to succeed at their current rate. Vaccine justice is the alternative. It traces these very inequities to deep structural causes that unfairly privileged white people in the global north, like myself, in particular the United States and Europe. These causes include the monopolization of public health technologies by corporate actors, the unequal distribution of global manufacturing capacity, research and development, and the racist myth that vaccines will simply go to waste in poorer countries. All of these structural causes add up to a reality where people in wealthy countries simply view themselves as more deserving of healthcare, or at best, as charitable actors once they have used up all the essential medicines that they need. By targeting the structural and systemic causes rather than the symptoms of inequity, vaccine justice seeks to build a pandemic response that goes far beyond inoculating people against a single disease. Vaccine justice rejects the myth of scarcity, or the idea that there are not enough vaccines to go around. It calls for structural changes that unleash the capacity of low and middle income countries to develop and manufacture vaccines for themselves, rather than having to beg for vaccines from wealthy countries. As WHO's senior advisor, Dr. Peter Singer, wrote recently, quote, "Give a country a vaccine and they will vaccinate for a day. Teach a country how to manufacture vaccines and they will be vaccinated for a lifetime." But vaccine justice goes even further than that. It recognizes that it is not vaccines alone that save lives, but also vaccination programs, which need to be delivered in the context of comprehensive health systems and holistic community services that enable a full range of prevention, treatment, and participation for all people. So let me just summarize 3 areas where addressing the systemic dimensions of vaccine inequity can make lasting change that protects people not only from COVID-19, but also from future pandemics. First is the development and manufacture of vaccines. We need to shift the power over who manufactures and develops from the global north to the global south. This requires constructing manufacturing plants and technology transfer hubs from Africa to Latin America, diversifying the manufacturing sector in Asia, and sharing technology and intellectual property in a global commons. These are all actions that European decision makers can take today. Second is financing and distribution. We need to shift the model of how vaccines are paid for and distributed from a model of charity and aid to a model of mutual resources and shared good. And that's going to require easing the debt burden in low and middle income countries, influencing the vast sums of money for vaccines that are being deployed for vaccine procurement and allocation by development banks such as the World Bank, and rethinking development assistance as a system of global public investment. And third and finally is vaccine delivery and uptake. Vaccine justice requires that we expand our focus from whether individuals are willing or hesitant to take vaccines to whether historically marginalized and excluded groups face structural barriers to being able to gain access to the vaccines that they want and need. That requires treating the health workers who administer vaccines with the dignity and respect that they deserve. It requires combating vaccine disinformation that is increasingly linked to authoritarian movements. And it requires surging vaccine delivery in the places that need it most, based on indices of vulnerability that account for historic patterns of inequity. European governments can not only influence these 3 measures that I mentioned, they can lead them, and they can lead them now. All 3 of these shifts, from north to south, from charity to shared good, from hesitancy to structural barriers, address an element of the root cause of the scandalous vaccine apartheid we are seeing today. Together, they move us from a system where wealthy countries and corporations market vaccines to a hesitant public and give the leftovers as charity, to a new system in which all countries work in solidarity and cooperation to produce a shared good that is prioritized according to need and historic barriers to access. This is the vision of solidarity that underlies the European Health Union. And this is the vision of solidarity that will solve the COVID-19 pandemic. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. Incredibly powerful and persuasive arguments there, and I know that they'll be taken up by the Institute as well. Stay with us, Jonathan, for the Q&A, but I'm going to go to our final speaker now, and a regular contributor at these seminars, at these webinars, the former Health Commissioner for the European Union, Vytenis Andriukaitis, who most of you know is the boss of the EIHSD. Labas, Vytenis, you're here to talk to us about European Health Union as seen by the European institutions, the reflection on the presentations that we've been hearing on the conference on the future of Europe.
Okay, thank you, John. Thank you, colleagues. I'm very happy about Jonathan's statement. Very strong, very powerful. Really, it shows why we need European Health Union, why we need changes, and why we need to have EU as a leading power globally. And I fully agree with Anna Carla speaking about social pillar, speaking about all aspects of social justice, because vaccine justice includes social justice also. No doubt we need to think about, about those issues, because, EU should show that social justice is on the agenda, and it is possible to implement it, as you just mentioned about, indicators, about, targets, about action plan, and of course we think about. Thank you, colleagues. May I start with my topic? May you know that political recognition of importance of international cooperation for health started long before the European community was created. Just after the World War II, in July 1946, European states, together with all others from over the world, were parties for signing the Constitution of the World Health Organization. A principle, may I quote, "The health of all peoples is fundamental to the attainment of peace and security, and is dependent upon the fullest cooperation of individuals and states." Is enshrined in this constitution, and please remember it. It remains valid till now. I have some suggestions why the principle of cooperation of states for health was not followed in treaties establishing the European Coal and Steel Community, the European Economic Community, or the European Union. First, the Treaty of Rome, the treaty establishing the European Economic Community, was aimed to work towards integration and economic growth through trade to create a common market based on the free movement of goods, people, services, and capital. In the 50s, social sector was a relatively small part of European economy, and social dimension also was out of the radars. The perception of health and other social spheres as non-productive sectors was quite widespread at those times. It appeared difficult for authors for consecutive treaties to go far beyond the traditional common market approach. Second, 8 years was a period when the Maastricht Treaty that shaped European Union was designed. At that period, health sector, including all components, starting from healthcare systems, finishing with medical devices or pharma industries, already established itself as one of the leading sectors of modern economy. Please look at this slide. But the 80s was a period of neoliberal thought and policies, and the notion that healthcare sector is precondition to the economic growth was far from the radars of the European Union policy. Nobody talked about some medicines as public goods, for example. From 1980s to 1990s, European countries were preoccupied with liberalization of national health systems and cost containment. Second, during 2 decades that passed after Maastricht, the health sector strengthened its position in European economy. It was one of the very few that created jobs even during the Great Recession of 2007-2009. Please look at this slide. Employment in health sector currently is almost twice exceeds Employment in sectors basic for the beginning of coal and steel agreement till our days. Agriculture, mining, manufacture of basic metals together. You see how is the biggest health sector from employment point of view. However, as recently as 2019, the health topic was considered a small issue for the EU, keeping in mind the subsidiarity principle and seeing it purely as a responsibility of member states. I know it from my first hands. And it was enshrined in the Lisbon Treaty as such, allowing the EU only coordinate, support or supplement health issues if member states require to do it, but member states not have the appetite to do it. And fourth, COVID-19 pandemic changed the perception of European health policy. For decades, Europeans at member states level were voting for more health by their tax money. Today, people are directly asking also the EU to do more for health. Europeans are demanding more Europe in health matters. The Eurobarometer, I can show you last data, indicates health as a first priority of Europeans. Demands of Europeans are noted by political elites. Since spring 2020, health is constantly present in political debates. A notion of a European health union was elevated to the rank of official policy of the EU by the European Parliament in last May and by the President of the European Commission in last September. Then, German Chancellor Angela Merkel supported the initiative up to the point of being open for discussing changes in European treaties. The growing understanding of the role health plays in the modern world is reflected by inclusion of health in between main themes of the Conference of the Future of Europe that started on 9th of May this year. During the opening session of the conference, the President of France, Emmanuel Macron, called for stronger action in health. The call was reiterated by the President of the European Commission and by the President of the European Parliament, David Sassoli, who stressed the need of European policy of human health, including a desire to go for treaty change. The topic of health was an important element of the first plenary on 19th of June of the conference. Many speakers raised the health topic as one of main topics in today's European reality. Europe needs more shared competences and more cooperation for health. May I draw your attention? Europe needs more shared competences, but till now, in the Lisbon Treaty, we have very small part of shared competence, only common safety concern. But more cooperation and more shared competences. Why? Because a proper management of pandemics is unthinkable without national borders. Public procurement of vaccines as common public goods is impossible without stronger role of the European Commission. Fight against cancer is impossible without pan-European solutions. European patients need the development of pan-European standards of quality of care and cure. The member states need stronger cooperation to tackle national failures in dealing with labor migration and risk management. We need to think about pan-European mechanisms. Rare diseases are affected up to 30 million Europeans now. And without well-functioning pan-European infrastructure, today we have European reference networks, it is mission impossible to deliver on the pledge to leave no one affected by rare diseases behind. In area of rare disease, no one country can deliver proper treatment at its own level. Subsidiarity principle doesn't work in this situation, and we need to think about treaty improvements. European health science and health industry has no chance to compete with the US and China without proper support of fundamental research and an opportunity to count on a region with 500 million population. Today, 420 million, because UK was left. Big data in health requires big actors. And only European health data space can help to solve problems related to personal treatment of rare cancers or rare diseases, or to addressing unmet needs of our people. Europeans are asking for stronger role of health in the EU, but today's proposal of the European Commission to build the European Health Union based only on the existing limits of the treaties cannot achieve better results. Only amendments of European treaties is a way to deliver on demands of European citizens. I would like to share main results achieved by collective efforts of leading European health reformers regarding development of European Health Union in long term. Last November, we developed a manifesto for European Health Union and an explanatory memorandum to this policy paper. Just a few days ago, a position paper, Treaty Change for a European Health Union, was finalized. The manifesto and memorandum are about the rationale and content of the European Health Union. The position paper is about a legal form for endorsement of the European Health Union. I would like to concentrate on recommendations described in the latest document, the position paper. First, the pandemic has shown that the member state must endow the EU with competences in a broader range of health matters if we are to maximize the benefits of European Union membership. The second, having stronger health competences at EU level would ensure a more nuanced political discussion on the application of provisions on subsidiarity and proportionality. Stronger EU competences in health matters require amendments to European treaties. Terms, health and social, may I draw attention on Anna Kadla, social should appear on the preamble of the Treaty on European Union, because we are speaking about health and well-being deal. The European Health Union should be explicitly indicated as one of areas of shared competences on Article 4 of the Treaty on European Union. Article 168 of Treaty on Functioning of the EU has to be amended by broadening competences of the EU in defining and implementing the European Health Union, protecting and promoting human health. Please, I can show you some proposals to amend the preamble Treaty on European Union, and then Article 3 of Treaty on the EU, and of course also Article 4 on the Treaty on Functioning of the EU, and of course also whole Article 168, many amendments. We did it. We delivered. It is really now a good time to have in our hands concrete, real, legally sound formulations. Health as an integral part of European transformation, but current European legislation requests that a high level of human health protection shall be ensured in the definition and implementation of all union policies and activities. But without shared competences and real instruments, the EU has no chance to deliver this request. Health is determined by multiple factors. On the other hand, development in human health are critical for employment or economy, from industrial and social policies, as it was indicated in the recently published book, Our European Future, Charting a Progressive Course in the World, edited by former member of European Parliament, a former member of Portuguese government, Maria João Rodrigues. The notion of the European Union is a part of the European economic and social model for ecological, digital, and post-COVID challenges. Health also is an indispensable element of EU external actions. And if we are speaking about vaccine justice, we need to understand the EU should have much more powers globally, and keeping in mind possibilities to play much stronger role. Development of European Health Union will bring positive changes to all dimensions of European life. If after the end of the pandemic, Europe will deliver on the promise to develop a genuine European Health Union, we will see more saved lives, more solidarity, higher level of competitiveness of Europe. But of course, these results will not come without a struggle. I know we are speaking about difficult game, but now, but I think that we should be prepared now in front of conference on the future to move forward and to show that Europe has energy to go into the next stage of development, keeping in mind economy of well-being and health and well-being as New Deal. I have covered expected changes from perspective of European Health Union, looking for insights on the future of Europe from social and global health perspectives. Only with stronger EU we can do much more addressing future global threats. We need now, as never before, European Union as strong global actor. Thank you, colleagues.
Thank you very much, Achu Vytautas, and thank you for your thoughts there. You've raised some very interesting issues. I'm going to bring everybody back in now for some questions and answers that I'm going to put to you. I've already put one to Ana Carla Pereira, who works with Commissioner Nicolas Schmit. I'm going to go back to Jonathan Cohen, if I may. Jonathan, you can unmute yourself. Have you heard anything today that would lead you to believe that the European Union, the key players in the European Union, are going to change their policy towards vaccine patents?
Definitely. As I mentioned, obviously this is an uphill battle, but much of the leadership of the People's Vaccine Campaign, of the effort to change the trade rules in the World Trade Organization, to waive patents and intellectual property protections for COVID vaccines, is coming from the European continent. It's coming from former European heads of state. It's coming from European civil society. It's coming from patient groups. It's coming from movements of health workers. So, and of course, this is a political issue. Governments respond to political pressure. Of course, there are some holdouts, but I think this is an important struggle. We must not give up. We have no time to waste. I think that waiving patents is absolutely critical if countries in the global south are going to be able to produce their own vaccines without having to look over their shoulder and worry that they're going to be slapped with a trade sanction. The fact that the United States, an incredibly important trade partner, geopolitical partner to Europe, has supported the waiver of patent protections is an excellent sign for Europe. They have done that at the very time that they are restoring the transatlantic alliance. So yes, I have no choice but to be optimistic. But I would underscore that we have no time to waste, Joe. Thank you.
Vytautas, back to you. France and Germany, the two biggest pharmaceutical countries in Europe, have said that they won't waive patents for vaccines. Why not?
Let's be clear. At the moment, we have very, strange picture. Of course, first of all, EU asks all global actors to disseminate vaccines and to implement vaccine justice now. Because EU is one of the biggest donors related to vaccination, to promote vaccination in 92 countries. And as you know, EU just spent a lot of financial resources and concrete vaccines to deliver to those countries. And you ask US do the same immediately. Not only speaking about words, but following actions. And of course, next step is to discuss how can we introduce, waiver issues, because patent waiver issues, because from my point of view, we need to go in both directions together, keeping in mind also possibilities to train third countries, to equip them with technologies, to teach them to produce it, because it's not easy to do it. And of course, we know very well some companies have resistance. Please be honest, and I see competition. I see also, some doubts. I see why some strongest pharma groups are lobbying not to be first, because they are spending money because they received a lot of public money, and of course they are playing a little bit double game. We need to understand it, as I mentioned, because struggle is here very big one. But from my point of view, we need now at the moment to ask all global leaders to deliver concrete vaccines to members, to less developed countries. Absolutely, we need to act now, because the level of vaccination today is so dangerous low. In the European region, I'm now speaking about 53 countries. You see unbelievable, strange picture. Generally, we achieved only about 16% of vaccination, because we have 1 billion people in European region. It's not only EU, it's 53 countries. But we are we are so late in achieving. But globally, it's absolutely this is morally shame that we are not capable to deliver our promises, and we need to cooperate immediately in delivering vaccines immediately, and then to think together to prevent steps. Speaking about the patent waivers and delivering of manufactured technologies to those countries, teach those countries, and establish common working group to see how can we encourage all countries to produce much more vaccines.
Thank you very much, Vytenis. Anna Carla, can I come back to you? You can unmute your microphone. Did you see the manifesto that Vytenis put up there? He was talking about treaty change to include the words health and social. I just wonder, getting back to what we were talking about earlier, whether there was anything in that manifesto that you thought would work or would not work.
Yes, you always ask difficult questions, Joe. I think first of all, a big question is whether there is space to open the treaty. There is political will to open the treaty. That is the number one question, right? And should that happen, then of course the entire debate about the health union and the competences about health will be forefront, because this has been the most lived discussion and these days. So there are other things beyond health that lead us to inquire whether there will be an opening of the treaty. I mean, for example, there is a discussion on the Stability and Growth Pact in the EU. That's also a very, very big issue. And so all things compounded, all those separate debates compounded, can lead to a discussion on opening the treaty. If that happens, then I think then looking at the articles that were mentioned makes a lot of sense. Now, I think maybe I would like to do the parallel to what happens in the social field, because I think that's an interesting parallel with health. Because in the social field, there are areas where it is possible to regulate at European level, because they were considered to be of common good, let's put it this way, but then leaving always the room for acknowledging the diversity of national systems. And I think that is maybe in that kind of perspective that one can look at the health, at the health systems. I think it would be very now unrealistic to think of a complete harmonized approach to health, right? But you can have areas that are purely of common interest where you have a much stronger role for the EU, and areas where you recognize the diversity and the national interest and the national objectives. So, and this is possible with the treaty. I mean, there are other cases, as I say, like in the social field, where this is happening. So it is not an illusion. It's not the glass totally full or totally empty. You can be middle way. Now, I think what is, of course, necessary is that there is an awareness that, again, together we have more efficient answers than separately. And I think this awareness is raising. So if I look at some of the language used in the manifesto, I could see some things that seem obvious to me, but others also slightly more daring in terms of political discourse. So I certainly will be very interested to see the follow-up of this discussion, because it does bring Europe to a new juncture, right? At a new level of integration. If this sort of discussions does materialize in reopening the treaty.
Obrigado, Ana Carla. Jonathan, can I come back to you from the Open Society Foundations? Away from vaccines, Jonathan, are there anything that you saw? Is there anything that you saw, any positives that you could take about some of the proposals that Vytenis was suggesting for a European health union? And again, what role do you see Europe playing in global health policy away from vaccines?
Thank you. I would like to return to the issue that brought us into partnership with Vytenis and the EIHSD, which is the very issue that Ana Carla talked about, which is the need for regional and global cooperation on the health workforce. We are desperately in need of a comprehensive approach to this issue, much like the vaccine. This is an issue that lends itself to competition, to fragmentation, to nationalist approaches, to a kind of neoliberal race to the bottom. Which country can recruit the most health workers, pay them the least? They end up squeezing the metaphorical balloon. The health workers go from one poorer part of Europe to a wealthier part of Europe. It becomes a global issue because the poorer parts of Europe then begin to recruit from other places in the globe. And COVID-19 has shone a spotlight on this issue in the same way it has shone a spotlight on the issue of access to essential medicines. So these are two ways in which the pandemic has highlighted the absolute need for a European health union. You asked before why Germany and France are holding out on the patent issue. In addition to everything that Vytenis said, I would argue that it is precisely the nationalist mindset that permits certain countries to excuse themselves from a common approach. If the United States had 50 different approaches to the COVID patent waiver, they wouldn't be supporting it either. It is because they have a single federal approach that the one American trade representative is able to go to the World Trade Organization and support this waiver. If we had the same approach in Europe, we would have a much better chance of supporting it as well and ending the pandemic.
Very good point, Jonathan. I wonder whether if Donald Trump had been re-elected in November, whether he would have suggested 500 million free vaccines. But we will never know that. We just know what the current policy from the White House is, and that it is aiming for a massive COVAX donation scheme. Can I ask you about health migration, Jonathan, while I have you here? It's always very interesting to have a global perspective rather than just a European perspective. The movement of healthcare workers, nurses and doctors and other specialists from less well-off countries to well-off countries. One of the suggestions that we have been talking about here on the Institute, the EIHSD, has been for the receiving country, be that France or Ireland or Germany, to pay some money back to the donating country for the education costs. I presume that's something that the OSG would welcome.
Look, there have been many experiments with different ways of compensating the source countries. I think it's important for the audience to be aware of the World Health Organization Code of Practice on the international recruitment of health workers and various experiments to try to address these outflows of health worker migration. That is an important idea. It deserves to be studied, but it's not enough. This is not going to be addressed until every single country has a comprehensive health workforce development strategy that recognizes that health workers have a human right, an inherent human right to seek and receive dignified work wherever they live, in their home or abroad. And that requires taking a full systems approach, as Ilona Kipwich talked about. It requires addressing how we educate health workers, how we recruit them, the professional development that we provide to them. At a previous webinar, you had Dr. Wolfgang Olitsky, who has demonstrated that professional development and continuing medical education can help to retain health workers. There is no magic bullet to this issue. There is no shortcut. It will be solved only when countries both develop their own comprehensive workforce development strategies and cooperate with each other in the development and implementation of those strategies. And a European Health Union would facilitate exactly that.
I think that's a wonderful way to end our Q&A at the moment. I will thank you all in due course, but I want to hand back to the boss, to Vytenis Andriukaitis, to give his final thoughts about this fourth webinar in the series, and maybe kind of talk about some of the issues that we might be looking forward to in the future series. Vytenis.
Okay, thank you, Joe, and thank you, colleagues. I would like to just to say a few remarks related to idea that it would be difficult to harmonize health issues across 27. European health is not about harmonization. Of course, we need to understand that we need to have common safety standards, the same treatment standards. We need to have the same protocols. Why? Because now it's a shame when you see innovative treatment and access to innovative treatment in Germany, for example, and only after 9 years, you can see the same access to innovative treatment in Cyprus or in Portugal. I know very well the situation. It fuels a lot of nationalism because people are feeling heart health is very close to people's heart, and it knows very well. And we are speaking about very challenging topics which need to be solved at the EU level. But Anna Carla, you know very well, health ministers are gathering in Luxembourg 1 time in a half a year. EBSCO Council, colleagues. I presented commission in EBSCO Council in social, but in Agriculture Council, I was every month. In health, 1 time per half a year. Can you imagine about what we are speaking, colleagues? And of course, I can tell you. And of nationalism, vaccine nationalism, and of course, pharmaceutical nationalism, also we see. Please look at the health technology assessment issues. Now, I am proud that 2 days ago, Council, Parliament and Commission approved finally health technology assessment proposal, which was built in 2018. But it means that we need to understand why we need to have, some areas where without cooperation, there's no chance to move forward. It's not about to build something, centralized. No, it's a wrong mistake. Please keep eyes on food safety issues. Food safety issues, we work in food safety very well, but all countries have their own food safety systems, but we have 3 levels of control, and we have some powers at European Commission level. It's the same speaking about health, and of course also keeping in mind obligations, the global obligations, and just rightly Jonathan mentioned about nationalism. It's very nationalistic approach. EU is not a member of WHO. Because nobody can provide EU with legal power to present EU at WHO level. EU is only at the WTO level as legal entity. But in other global entities, you can see only observatory or observation from EU side. It's very weak. It's very weak. We need now to understand global architecture requires as never to go forward and to see. Of course, I know that this is very, very difficult. And speaking about the healthcare workforce shortages, dear Anna, as you know that in time of pandemic, 40% of nurses we lost in emergency sectors. Because they decided to go out because the job was very difficult, salary is very low. And what can we do now? And can you imagine that you have in some countries 0 nurses to vaccinate people? I am not speaking about Ukraine, about Russia. I'm speaking about 27 EU. It's just rightly mentioned, Jonathan, about comprehensive health workforce development strategies. But you know how it is difficult to encourage, to discuss those issues because health ministers are gathering only one time in half a year. So it's ridiculous. And of course we need to be open. And now health as a topic in public opinion is very high. And it's time now to use all opportunities to encourage Conference of Europe to speak about possibilities, to go forward. Of course, I know I was member of European Convention. I know how it was painful to see results of referenda in France and in the Netherlands when we lost treaty establishing constitution for Europe, of course, but we need to go. Otherwise, we have no chance to have, and healthcare workforce shortages now should be included into broader picture of necessity to really have much more comprehensive strategies addressing many challenges. Digital health is impossible without healthcare workforce on the ground. If you have 0 doctors and 0 nurses, what can you do with digitalization? Nothing, because nobody is capable to deliver it. And why we are now going into next stage, debating issues related to healthcare workforce shortages in more comprehensive manner, but keeping in mind a whole picture holistically, and knowing that we need to discuss those issues with your cabinet, because it is because healthcare workforce recruitment, retainment, planning, enforcement, and so on. Of course, recognition of healthcare professionals, it's very also a challenging issue, and we need to find on the next stage some frame of pan-European instruments. It's a very complex one. It's not only one silver bullet. It is very complex, but we need to move into such direction, thinking about possibilities to present new ideas and new tools. Speaking about healthcare, but I know very well. But France, UK, and Germany, they are not so keen to develop their own capacities to train doctors and nurses. They are recruiting those from less developed countries, and then saying, okay, it's free movement of people. Yes, it's free movement. But we need to understand how is a challenging situation today in EU when Euroscepticism is going, up and nationalism is going on. Please look at today's situation with Hungary and the possibilities to find common approach between all 27 leaders of member states. It's shame on me, because I know that my country was decided not to sign common letter. But we need to act now. We are speaking also about democracy, about human rights, about perspective, and about new wave. And, because Europe, it looks in eyes of people as old one, as old one project. We need to push much more energy, and health is very sensible issue and very close to people. How can we bring Europe closer to people? Through health topics. Thank you.
True, Vytenis, thank you very much. I can see the passion with which you hold this subject, and it's great to see, because that's how you achieve things, through passion and through expertise, and that's what you've got here. And I'd like to thank our experts today: Ana Carla Pereira from the European Commission, Jonathan Cohen from Open Society Foundations, and of course you, Vytenis, our chairman of EIHSD, and Ilona Kickbush for submitting her video. Stay tuned for the next webinar in our series, which hopefully will be in the autumn. We will post a synopsis video of today's event, and we'll put it on the website, so you'll be able to watch a shorter version of the whole thing again on EIHSD.eu. From all of us, and from me, Joe Lynham, stay healthy, stay well, enjoy your summer holidays, and if you can, we'll see you all soon. Ciao.
Ciao.